All right, I'd like to welcome everybody out to our change orders webinar this afternoon. We're going to give about another minute to let a few other attendees join the meeting, and then we'll get started. All right, well, I'd like to welcome everybody out to today's webinar, change orders, how to manage expectations, contract execution, and how to measure production and profitability on those change orders. First, I want to introduce ourselves. My name is Troy Guevara. I'm with a company called Busy. Busy is a mobile smart job site data company. We were founded by a forward-thinking excavator. We're not a tech company as much as we're a consulting company that is using tech to find better ways to innovate the construction industry by streamlining processes and making companies more profitable. Our mobile apps give you the ability to get real-time data so you can measure the productivity of your labor and equipment as they relate to the various scopes on projects, cost codes, phases, and anything you want to measure on a construction project. As I said, my name is Troy Guevara. My primary role at Busy is project implementation. I take the app of Busy and I marry the technology of the app to the project management structure of a company, and as well as help them implement the processes to generate the best reports and best practices to maximize their efficiency and profitability by using Busy. All right, so let's talk about the reality of change orders right now. As a former construction company owner, subcontractor primarily, I cannot tell you how many times I sat in pre-construction meetings and I heard an owner's rep or even a GC say, all right, our goal for this project is 0 change orders. It wasn't uncommon for me to already know 3, 4, 5 change orders that we're going to hit as a project progressed. I saw those happen, so I knew from that statement that change orders were going to be a battle in this project. And if I wanted to remain profitable, these were the things I was going to have to do or prepare for in order to remain profitable on this job, because they would try and milk me out of some of those change orders. So I've also been on the other side of the equation when projects started and it was just naturally built into the contract the potential ads that were already anticipated. Some of them were owner ads because maybe they had more budget than they had anticipated. Some of them were GC ads because the GC knew, okay, these things are going to come up. We anticipate them already. So the bottom line is, on every project I knew that there was going to be the potential for change orders, and it's not always going to happen, but it's most likely probable. So I can't think of too many projects I had that didn't have some sort of change in the contract price, regardless of the reason. Right here, I've got an image of a small life raft, you'll see that's the original contract. And then there's a large yacht there that says change order. There's two ways you can read this. If you hop on what you think is a really fat change order and it doesn't go well, you're going to have to jump ship and hop on the life raft and just hope your original contract saves your butt. The other way you can see this is, I've got my original contract and I hope to make money on it, but I also have an opportunity to make good money on some change orders. And certainly we're not looking to rape anybody here, but the opportunity to become more profitable because of the results of change order is completely possible. And there's ways to implement into your company so that these things can happen. We want to define what a change order is. And so essentially anything that's not included in the original scope of work based on the contract and plans and specs is considered a change order. So in order to have a change order, we have to establish two items. First, we have to establish what the original contract was, and two, what was the original scope of work, which should be implied within the contract documents or referred in the contract documents, okay? And as we all know, as perfect as contract drawings are, and I say that with tongue in cheek, sometimes things just aren't perfect, and so something could be missing, and so any of that would constitute a change order. Anything that is of significant change should be considered a change order. So, whether it affects your dollars or not, even if it's just a change in the timeline or a change in a product, but maybe there's no expense involved, that should be considered a change order and something that you should document. As contractors, we have a right to make money. And so I want to talk about the 5 basic types of change orders as we go forward here. But as I do, I'm also going to send out a poll question. We're just curious on this poll question, how often do change orders come up on your projects? All right, so let's talk about the 5 most common types of change orders. All right, at its most basic level, a change order is an addendum to any contract for additional items requested by the owner or the GC. Usually these occur because an owner has more budget than anticipated, or a GC has more budget than anticipated, and he's working on behalf of the owner or the developer. Okay, in some instances, change orders can be a completely separate contract that is not part of the original contract. Maybe you build one building and there's another building to go, and instead of issuing a change order, they just give you a whole new contract. Certainly, that's okay. We'll take those also. Okay, time and material change orders or contracts usually occur when there's unknowns. They could be conditions, it could be weather, potential changes in materials or pricing. And when these conditions occur, a T&M change order protects you from the unknown. However, it's not uncommon for developers, owners, GCs to have a not to exceed in order to protect them from a T&M change order getting out of hand. Okay, winter change orders are often lumped into the time and materials. However, we're seeing more and more now that winter change orders are considered lump sum change orders. And so I would caution you against using lump sum unless the winter change order is very much in your favor. Okay, lump sum change orders usually occur when the full nature and the extent of the change order is known, including the material pricing and the impact to the schedule. And now, while not significant to the contract price, zero cost change orders are an important part of a contract because they will affect the schedule. They can affect liability and warranty information, as well as final as-built. And so it's important that just because there's not a cost associated with the change order, that you still get some sort of documentation to protect yourself from future issues or challenges. And then, of course, there's unit cost change orders, which are similar to time and material, but the price has already been predetermined in the cost. And so these can pose a little bit, well, actually, they can pose substantially more risk than the typical time and material change order. So, all right, what we want to do is we want to determine when to get started on any change order. Now, that might seem simple because we just say, all right, I'm not going to do anything until we get the change order signed. And if we remember what I mentioned earlier, that anything that's outside of the original contract scope of work is considered a change order. And a lot of times contract documents will reference that no work can be done on a change order without documentation. But life isn't always that way. And on any construction site, we have things that come up that are necessary to continue to go and do, even though we don't have documented paperwork for that particular change order. So the question is how do we really determine when to start on any change order? So we don't want to be that contractor that loses money because of a handshake. And we've all heard of those stories where, in fact, we know companies that have lost tens, some even close to hundreds of thousands of dollars because they did a change order without the proper documentation. At the most simple levels, no work should be done on any change order until the change order has been issued and signed by all parties. It may even be necessary to ensure that the funds are available. Perhaps you've got an owner that's a little tight on funds. It might be good to verify those funds are there. I can think of my own personal experience. I had a signed and documented change order for an entire additional building on a water treatment plant. It exceeded $250,000. The change order had been approved. All the documents are signed. We proceeded. And when we billed, they told us it would be about 3 months before we got paid because they didn't have the funds. It was a water treatment plant, so that water district wasn't going to get their funds from the taxpayers for 3 more months. And so we had to wait 3 months to get paid on that particular project, or at least that particular portion of that project. Change orders don't have to have a cost associated with them, can be started on immediately. But again, I would caution you to make sure that everything's been documented and photographed as you go through this so that you can still get some sort of approval saying that this was good to go. Changes in schedule should always be treated this way. So always document anything like that to prevent yourself from risk of future liquidated damages. And then the toughest types of change orders are those that have an immediate impact on costs and schedule and potential of delays, but the approval is not going to be quick. These types of change orders usually occur when there's errors or omissions in the plans or the specs. And sometimes these are essential pieces. I can think of excavators that they discover a type of soil and they don't have the dollars in the budget to whether to remove it or excavate it, or maybe some sort of fill needs to be brought in that they don't have approval on, and the entire project will be shut down if they don't continue to proceed. And so, because we so often in our contractor world work on handshakes and we trust people, we will proceed. Well, it's important that you get as much documentation in place, and in the absence of that documentation, if you choose to move forward, which you do at your own risk, it's very important that you document everything on a daily basis as you proceed. So as you write down your daily reports, I would highly recommend that you have a tool in place to be able to document every hour, maybe every minute that is spent on that particular scope of that change order, including photo documentation, man hours, manpower, written documentation, all the information you would have on your daily reports and more to protect yourself. And then in addition to that, I would also highly recommend sharing that information on a daily basis so that it's not a surprise to the GC or the owner when it's all finished. Okay, so let's talk about the ways we negotiate change orders. So first off, we need to establish that the work that we're talking about qualifies as a change order. And as we said before, if it's outside of the original scope, based on the contract documents, the plans and specs, then it's a change order. First thing we want to do is make sure that the price is correct and that it's profitable and that the scope of work is completely clear. Okay. We want to agree on the type of change order that's going to be submitted. Is it a time and material? Is it a lump sum? Is it a unit change order, a unit cost change order? Okay, some change orders are more open-ended. That price isn't necessarily undetermined, and that's why I say maybe this is a time and material one, and maybe you're okay with putting a not to exceed on there because you know it will not exceed a certain amount, but make sure you protect yourself that that not to exceed is high enough. I can think of circumstances where I've seen winter change orders and I was given a not to exceed, and there's times when I'm like, yeah, okay, we won't exceed that, and then the weather really did turn for the worse and we started pushing that cap. I can think of other times where I just said, let's do a lump sum, and it was so high that we were never going to hit that number, and we smiled all the way to the bank in those situations. And then an important part is to agree on the time extension on any change order, because generally, almost always, there's going to be some sort of time extension needed. Because you have more scope of work. So whether it's impact because of weather or additional materials or whatever it is, it's going to impact your schedule. And so it's imperative that you get some sort of time extension on that change order. And again, as I said before, make sure you get everything written in that change order, get it documented, get signatures on it as quickly as you can. Okay, so as we discussed earlier, the nature of any change order is a change to the original scope of work that was included in the original contract documents, including the plans and the specs. So a lot of GCs hope that there will not be change orders on a project. A lot of owners hope that. But regardless of their good intentions, I would always recommend that when you sign your original contract documents, that you have predetermined in that, and maybe you make this an addendum to your contract, you have standard pricing for potential change orders, recognizing that some types of change orders may not be the same standard rate. So you may want to have a high and a low and a medium, whatever works best for your company and the type of business you do. But this gives you leverage when it's time to go negotiate the change order. And it's better to have this negotiation done up front prior to the contract documents being signed than later down the road when you're at risk and there's more and you have less leverage. I can tell you stories of owners that ask for credits. There's one particular owner, a developer, I guess, owner that I know in the market that I used to contract in, where he would often intentionally put potential credit change orders in there, credits to him, that is, in the contract documents because they knew they were going to change things. And as by nature of any contractor, when we give a credit back, we give less than what we would have done had that not been in the original scope of work, because we're protecting our profit. Well, this particular owner has a tendency to do that. Then he turns around and asks for a change similar to that, and he expects you to honor that same pricing credit that you gave. He expects you to do that work for that same price. I think that's dirty business, and I can tell you he did it once to me, and I never worked with the guy again. And a lot of contractors are that way, and that eventually will come back to burn them. However, I should have protected myself up front, and if I'd have had this predetermined pricing in there, negotiated in, I would have been in much better shape. So always be wary of tactics like these, and have it in your written contract, these predetermined prices. Okay. We've all heard the story of unpaid change orders. I told you of one earlier that took me about 3 months to get paid on. But there's a few not to dos. Let me give these to you. One, you do not start without approval. Always track your change orders. Okay, whenever you're working on open-ended change orders such as time and materials, be sure to have a process and tools in place so the contractor can get daily reports of the hours, manpower, materials, all the documentation you have, including photo documentation, and have a system in place to capture this information and share it daily. Reporting this information on the daily basis is probably the best way to help them swallow that change order pill that they've got to change. If you come at them with $100 grand and one lump sum, they're not going to be happy about it. But if you feed them $1,000 a day for 100 days, they can swallow that. Eventually they'll start to choke on it, but it won't be near as bad as it was if you just hand them that $100,000 bill at the end. Okay, it's always, my experience has been, it's always easier for them to swallow that one bite at a time instead of eating that whole elephant in one bite. One of the most often overlooked components that I see to any change order is the impact that it has on the other components of your business. And I see this a lot doing what I do now, is companies will get change orders and they don't think how this affects other projects, including their future backlog. So anytime you participate in the process of negotiating a change order, one area that you've got to look at is the impact to other parts of your business. So we know that the nature of any change order can have a significant impact to the scope of work that you're on that particular contract. But consider those effects as you look at your company-wide manpower, other projects. How is that going to affect other projects? How's it going to affect your backlog? Maybe it's going to affect a foreman. If you've got a change order that's going to carry you over a couple months, you're planning on that foreman or that superintendent going to a new job, that's going to have impact on that new job. Do you have to bring in another foreman? Do you have to promote somebody temporarily? What impact is that going to have because of a change order extension? What about equipment and assets? Is that equipment going to be needed somewhere else? Do you have the ability to rent other equipment? Do you have equipment in the yard that you can bring over to compensate for that? So those are components that have to be considered, and they can have a significant impact on all of your resources, including your office staff. So one of the things that should always be considered when making considerations for any change order is these associated costs and the impact to the business. So I'm going to share another poll question with you. We're curious about this. How often do change orders throw off your scheduling? Be curious to see the data on that, and let's see what kind of results we get here. So, all right, let's continue here. Okay, so let's talk a bit about how to make change orders part of your contract execution from the beginning of the project. So not all contracts address the change order process, but oftentimes there will be some sort of written documentation in there, and so be wary of that and know where that is in the contracts. What are the steps? Be sure that the change order process is defined when you sign your original contract, whether that's part of the original contract or it's an addendum to your contract. Discuss the paperwork needs of change orders and how to work through that process legally. And always be sure to have documentation that provides the associated labor costs, equipment costs, material costs, impact to schedule, and have that, as I said earlier, have that those items in place prior to negotiating a change order, preferably in your original contract documents. There's a lot of times that markups are predetermined in contract documents, so be cautious of this and be aware of this. And I've seen many times when those markups were less than what you would have on your normal markup on your project. So don't get burned by that. Make sure that you're protected in that aspect. And approvals, one of the most impactful events in the change order process. So without approval, significant portions of work can be delayed. And so again, your contract schedule is going to get extended, puts a strain and stress on your manpower, office, equipment. So always protect yourself in those things and anticipate how to mitigate those delays. And then in some circumstances, the necessary change has to happen. You've got to get it done now. So I'm always going to caution you against proceeding with any of that work prior to approval. But if you can't wait for approval, if it's necessary, you don't want to send guys home for a week or even for a day, be sure to get all the parties to agree verbally and agree on a documentation process that they're going to be able to sign daily as you go through this. So get that documented, and including manpower, materials, everything that you have pertinent to that, and tons of photo documentation, so that as you do work for that change order, you can get them to sign off on that on a daily basis. So learning to understand the change order approval process is going to have a significant impact on your internal processes, and make sure that your superintendents know this. Whoever's running your job sites, Make sure they know what that process is. Okay, so behind the scenes impact is going to have a big impact. What's happening behind the scenes is going to have a big impact on the length of the approval process. We all know that the GC's got to sign off on the change order. Okay, but it's not always, the change order isn't just always between the GC and the sub. Sometimes the change order is between the sub and a sub. The GC still needs to sign off on that. Sometimes the owner's involved. Make sure you're getting the owner's approval. And unfortunately, sometimes the owner's approval is going to necessitate an architect or an engineer's approval. So make sure you know the parties are involved. So, you know, there might be some simple change orders and GC says, yeah, it's a couple grand. We'll sign off on that. You go do it. If it's something the owner needs approvals on and wants the architect and the engineer's approvals, that's going to take a lot longer to get that approved. And then in some situations, the parties that handle the dollars, whether it's a bank or a state agency, which of course would be the owners, or whoever it is handling the dollars on it, they're going to have to sign off on this also. So make sure you know who that is. And like I said earlier, I had a water district that didn't have the money. They signed the change order, but they didn't have the money in place. And I wish I'd have made sure that was in place before we proceeded in that particular project. Okay. Now, I want to help you understand that one of the things that busybusy does as a tool is we have the ability to help you measure your production and your profitability on your change orders. And we do that simply through our app. So each of your employees have the ability from busybusy to be able to clock into a particular change order, as well as the job. We can measure cost codes, phase codes, any of that information that you want. And you can measure those change orders on a daily basis. You can track the time, the materials, the equipment, the manpower, and we can also add photo documentation as part of that process. And the best part is you can pull out from busybusy a report on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, or whatever time frame you choose. And that report can be built so that you can send that information over to the GC or whoever it is you need to submit that to as a request. Again, I would recommend doing that on a daily basis, weekly at a minimum, so that they're seeing that information come through and you have the ability to document everything to protect yourself. So as I said, with the right tool, you can track every change order separately from every other part of the contract, including employees, equipment, hours, written documentation, and photo documentation and materials. Okay. The right tool will also help ensure that your production is moving on this particular change order according to the needed pace, so that you're going to make money on this change order, so it'll be fat. And of course, with that, we'll make sure that your change order remains profitable. So how does busybusy help with this? Well, as I said, busybusy is a complete job costing solution. Okay, busybusy will help you track time to every project, sub-project, cost code, phase code, task, whatever method or tool you want to measure a project with, busybusy can do that. Okay, busybusy can track time to every single piece of equipment you own, including identifying that piece of equipment's location. And busybusy has a separate equipment app, so you can load each piece of equipment you want. The employees can see that equipment. They have the ability to identify the equipment and clock into each piece of equipment as they use it, or as they don't use it. So you will know what equipment use isn't happening. You know, for example, maybe they're only on a single piece of equipment for 4 hours a day, not 8, but you still want to charge 8 hours a day for that piece of equipment to a change order. We give you the ability to do that and measure that information. busybusy allows you to take great notes, not just a foreman filling out a daily report, but you have the ability within busybusy to have every single employee participate in that daily report process. And it's a very simple talk to text type report. They can hit the mic on their phone, they can talk into it and say what they did or what they're doing or what they're going to do or whatever they want to put in there. And there's no limit to the number of characters they can put in there. And I've seen companies that have every employee put, 100 to 200 characters in there describing what their daily work was. And imagine the power that that has when you're trying to go in and negotiate a change order. Because as we all know, if you need to get 50 grand for a change order, you price it at 70 grand, and when they negotiate you down to 55, you're happy, and they're happy, right? Well, imagine the power of this. If you have all this documentation in place, they're not going to be able to negotiate you down as far. They might negotiate you a little bit because you want to concede a little bit because you know you're going to come out way ahead. But that big yacht that I had in the picture earlier in our first slides, that's your yacht because of the proper documentation being in place. And again, all of this can come out in daily activity reports within the Bizi app. So we give you the power to handle that and to manage all of that right within the Bizi timekeeping app. Okay, so to learn a little bit more about Bizi and how we can help you, I invite you to call our team at the number listed here on the screen. And of course, we're always happy to schedule a demo with you just by visiting our website. We can help you do that. Please let me know what more we can do to help you. And again, I thank you for your time.